Hi, good morning everyone. My name is Amanda Phillips DeLucas. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Carey Institute of Ecosystem Studies. I'm currently working on a project studying perceptions of green infrastructure in Baltimore City, which I'm happy to talk about after this. But today I'm going to be transitioning a bit back to my dissertation research, which was on highway building and activism in Baltimore during the 1960s and 1970s. I know that we have a lot of echo in here, so if anyone would like my script that I've written for today afterwards, just please come up and talk to me. I'm happy to send it your way. So I do have some pictures today. Not all of them correspond to what I'm talking about, so I'm happy to explain those as well. All right. While it may not surprise the residents in this room, the city that designers, engineers, and architects propose for Baltimore is not the one we live in. Even a cursory dive into the trenches of municipal archives uncovers long-forgotten plans that reimagined life for Baltimore's inhabitants. The dusty documents showcase sewer lines never constructed, highways just on the horizon, and even a Disney-esque people mover that would transport tourists and workers around the inner harbor. Literature in my home discipline of science and technology studies refers to these civic fever dreams as imaginaries to describe how large visions of technological transformation take hold amongst societies, cultures, and individuals. Yet planning documents reflect administrative and political ideals of future transformation. In focusing on what was imagined to inhabit future landscapes, we risk losing histories already pushed to the margins of society. Indeed, if our framework starts from the question of what could have been, we have already lost sight of what has happened on the ground. I'm prefacing my conversation today with this caveat because of the difficulty of discussing highway planning in general, but in Baltimore specifically, without referring back to civic visions of what the city could have been. Building roads requires massive financial resources, as well as a wide range of technical ability and expertise. This limits not only who participates in discussions pertaining to roads, but also what plans and possibilities become accepted. The centrality of technocratic power, some may argue, is a characteristic feature of building any large infrastructure system. Yet, today's symposium invites us to think about how systems might be made inclusive. Following this line of thought, it seems necessary to reconsider assumptions about infrastructures, both those imagined in the past and material in the present. Often we might think of a road as static and immovable. As long as it's maintained, we assume it will persist. Yet, this same object also carries people, technologies, and information across space and time. We are, in the words of Lauren Berlant, bound by infrastructure to a world in movement. I think this is a useful observation to frame the day and the rest of my talk, where I will discuss a few vignettes from the history of highway building in Baltimore. I draw attentions to the ways that planners and engineers designed roadways to be exclusionary, and the ways that activists responded with alternative visions for civic reform that would have made these systems more inclusive. Slide. Let's for a moment travel back to 1943, when a bitter controversy tore through Baltimore. The argument, which divided engineers, planners, and residents, concerned the placement of two highway routes. While neither plan necessitated the other, a shortage of resources during World War II led to a civic battle over a local bond issue that could guarantee investment and thus the eventual completion of one road over another. My slides don't have anything to do with what I'm talking about, so it's totally fine. The first route envisioned a bridge crossing the harbor. This freeway would connect the neighborhoods of Fairfield to the south and Canton to the north, bypassing the city center and effectively routing through traffic to the urban fringe. The second route placed a depressed expressway running east and west through the neighborhoods of Harlem Park and Franklin Square. This road aimed to create an efficient route into the city center for suburban residents frustrated by long commutes and growing urban gridlock. Each proposal faced public dissent. The bridge, some feared, would decimate the industrial prosperity of the port. The East-West Expressway faced another set of problems. No, we can move one more. There we are. Okay, we're good. Okay, so the East-West Expressway faced another set of problems, including the challenging task of acquiring residential and commercial property. The expensive and time-consuming right-of-way acquisition led Philip S. Morgan, a former president of the Baltimore Real Estate Board, to proclaim that comparatively, the bridge would cost the city nothing. In true Baltimore fashion, the mayor assembled a committee to choose between two alternatives. Additionally, in true Baltimore fashion, the committee was outsourced to a bunch of out-of-state contractors. The team was led by none other than New York's Robert Moses. Slide. Writing in an article for The Atlantic soon after his commission, Moses describes transportation infrastructures as responsible for the overall decline in urban investment. He writes, in many cities, this process of central decay has been encouraged and speeded up by the building of rapid transit, railroad, and road, and other facilities to minutely subdivide farms and estates in the outlying sections and suburbs. The affluent fled urban environments, leaving those who remain to live with legacies of civic neglect. Moses suggests building freeways through blighted neighborhoods, thereby allowing suburban populations in a pathway to easily travel into and out of the city. Slide. Moses' plan for Baltimore, the Baltimore Arterial Report, recommended the East-West Expressway route over the Harbor Bridge. Moses and his team put a price tag on the project, $40 million. The plan also required the displacement of 19,000 people. A disproportionate number of these residents were from lower income and communities of color. In his assessment of the Franklin-Mulberry corridor, Moses writes, some of the slum areas through which the Franklin Expressway passes are a disgrace to the community, and the more of them that are wiped out, the healthier Baltimore will be in the long run. Slide. The Mayor's Commission disagreed with the overall assessment of Moses' report. Committee member Herbert Brune questioned how this freeway could help Baltimore when it poses a mountain of human misery. The plan guaranteed that the city would need to solve a housing crisis if the road was constructed, but also that Baltimore would lose a considerable percentage of its tax base. In the end, the commission failed to support the plan. The long-term human and economic costs did not outweigh the potential but uncertain benefits Moses promised. Yet, as the existence of the highway to nowhere suggests, the commission's decision did not end the push to build a comprehensive road system for the city. Even though the plan was rejected, the Baltimore Arterial Report created a framework and a justification for developing a roadway that could displace thousands in support of suburban convenience. As the push to build urban highways increased in the 1950s and 1960s, activists in Baltimore crafted political rhetoric that drew inspiration from this spatial exclusion. Moses clearly understood highways as transformative technologies with the potential to direct not only how people can move through the city, but importantly, who gets to participate in new spaces. The question of who can move, access, and interact with roadways became a rallying point for activists as they fought for a more inclusive future. Slide. The Federal Highway Act of 1956 allocated about $25 billion towards the construction of interstate highways and freeways. Under this legislation, local municipalities paid 10% of the costs, with the federal government covering the other 90%. These incentives encouraged a nationwide scramble for civic leaders and representatives to write new or implement long-awaited road proposals that could qualify their districts for allocations of federal funds. These plans were often highly contested. While many freeway revolts across the city resisted highway construction outright, in Baltimore, some activists argued for the right to remain in the city following residential displacement. Relocation Action Movement, or RAM, was one of the first groups to organize and put pressure on city officials to change their procedures for acquiring the right-of-way for the eventual East-West Expressway. Slide. RAM was active as an organization during the late 60s following the issuing of condemnation orders for the Franklin-Mulberry corridor in 1965. Many members of the group resided in the Rosemont and Harlem Park neighborhoods, two areas deeply threatened by the proposed highway route. The group stressed to officials that not only were they not being fairly compensated for their physical relocation, they were being asked to sacrifice their place in the city altogether. Mourning this loss, organizers wrote, quote, "This expressway was uprooting them from their own homes and leaving them stranded without enough money to purchase another home in the city, which does not provide for the adequate rehousing of its relocated citizens." To accept the claim of the freeway meant not only a loss of one's home, but a loss of the ability to make a claim to space within Baltimore proper. In a meeting with Governor Spiro Agnew in the winter of 1968, RAM argued against displacement by focusing on a larger conception of discrimination enacted through highway policy. The arguments became one of justice predicated on the right to live within, support, and make claims to urban space. Later in the meeting, the group exposed the cost-benefit analysis of practices of city engineers and urban planners as perpetuations of segregationist policies. Rather than calculating the financial benefit of constructing rivers of asphalt, RAM demanded a reappraisal of this calculus to treat existing residents as already valued and not merely disposable. The group insisted upon expanding housing options and assessing homes at pre-highway proposal market value so as to provide enough compensation for residents to relocate without undue financial burden. Stopping road building efforts did not factor heavily into the aims of RAM. The group configured itself as obstructive until fair compensation was guaranteed. Nowhere is this more evident than in the position taken by organizers that unless those being victimized are treated like human beings, no expressway will pass through our city. RAM claimed community ownership of the urban spaces that its members occupied. The rhetoric and policy alternatives put forth by members organized around the concept that the people, homes, communities, and cultures within the Franklin-Mulberry corridor contained value. Additionally, RAM argued that a highway built in the city should benefit the communities through which it passes, rather than primarily serving suburban commuters. The reimagined highway would be guided not by modernistic impulses of a new urban reality, but rather a future where residents had more agency in how public space was transformed. Proposals to enact these practices included the prioritization of Black local contractors in the awarding of expressway contracts, job training programs to staff construction projects, and the development of integrated mass transit alongside expressway infrastructure. RAM's activism suggested an alternative future for roads where spaces ceased to be slums. Highway developers now needed to account for the voices, bodies, and properties RAM articulated as valued. By demonstrating how roadway infrastructure worked as a mechanism of deletion, the group brought visibility to exclusionary policies made in the name of progress and modernity. The group proved successful in some of its goals, including the creation of a state law that would compensate displaced individuals with money to cover the replacement value of their homes, but also a subsidy of up to $5,000. We recognize today that the effects of highway development and road building were not evenly felt across all neighborhoods and residents of Baltimore. The highway to nowhere stands as a stark reminder of the drive exemplified by Moses to remake the city in the image of the suburban commuter. The work of RAM demonstrates the potency in suggesting an alternative in the face of power. As we think today about reimagining MLK Boulevard, I hope the words of RAM resonate as we propose alternative plans that can better fit the unique needs and challenges of our communities. Furthermore, I hope that this brief dive into history challenges the idea that infrastructures are fixed, immovable, or condemned to conform to power. Residents already had a hand in shaping the roads that we have and can shape what's to come. Thank you.